Stephen Young never expected to find a mate on an alien world, let alone one considered repulsive by her own kind. Yet here he stands, transfixed by the mottled scales and asymmetrical ridges of Sarah, the denobulan outcast who saved his life. The year is 2157. The USS Horizon, humanity's first deep space colony ship, lies in ruins on the surface of Denobula Prime. Stephen, the ship's systems engineer, surveys the wreckage. Twisted metal and shattered dreams litter the alien landscape. He's one of the few survivors, thrust into a world of bioluminescent forests and reptilian humanoids. The native Denobulans eye the human intruders with suspicion. Tense negotiations lead to an uneasy coexistence, but resources are scarce. Every day brings new challenges as the colonists struggle to establish a foothold on this unforgiving world. Stephen joins a scouting mission to map the surrounding terrain. The team pushes through dense foliage, their path illuminated by ethereal glows from alien flora. Unfamiliar sounds echo through the air, setting nerves on edge. Without warning, Stephen loses sight of his companions. Panic rises in his chest as his oxygen levels drop dangerously low. Stumbling through the underbrush, Stephen's vision blurs. His lungs burn with each labored breath. Just as hope fades, he breaks through the tree line and discovers a hidden Denobulan settlement. Alien eyes turn to stare at the intruder. Among the crowd, one figure stands apart. Sarah, shunned by her people for her unusual appearance, approaches the struggling human. Despite the language barrier, she recognizes his distress. With gentle urgency, she guides Stephen to safety. As Stephen regains his strength, he studies his savior. Sarah's scales shimmer with an irregular pattern, her facial ridges asymmetrical. By Denobulan standards, she's considered hideous. Yet Stephen finds himself drawn to her intelligence and resilience. Days pass as Sarah helps Stephen navigate the hostile environment. They develop a system of gestures and simple words, bridging the gap between their species. Stephen's perception of beauty begins to shift, seeing past Sarah's alien features to the person within. Meanwhile, tensions escalate between the human colonists and Denobulans. The alien elders demand the humans leave their world, their patience wearing thin. Violence looms on the horizon. Stephen realizes his connection with Sarah might be the key to preventing an interplanetary war, but the complex social hierarchies of Denobulan society present a formidable obstacle. Sarah's status as an outcast complicates every interaction. As Stephen works to foster understanding between their species, he finds himself increasingly attracted to Sarah. Her alien physiology challenges everything he thought he knew about compatibility. Their deepening relationship becomes a catalyst for change, forcing both humans and Denobulans to confront deep-seated prejudices. In this crucible of cultural clash and personal discovery, Stephen and Sarah stand at the precipice of a new frontier. Their unlikely bond may reshape the future of two species if they can overcome the barriers that divide them. As Stephen and Sarah stood at the precipice of a new frontier, their unlikely bond began to reshape the future of their two species. The days that followed in the hidden Denobulan settlement became a crucible of cultural exchange and personal discovery. Stephen's damaged equipment yielded an unexpected treasure, a rudimentary translation device. With this tool and a system of gestures and drawings, he and Sarah bridged the language gap that had initially separated them. Their conversations flowed more freely, revealing the depths of their respective cultures. "Tell me about your world," Sarah asked one evening, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing softly in the dim light of her dwelling. Stephen's eyes widened as he searched for words to describe Earth. "It's blue and green, with vast oceans and towering mountains. We have deserts of sand and forests of trees that reach towards the sky." Sarah tilted her head, her asymmetrical ridges catching the light. "And your people? Are they all like you?" Stephen laughed softly. "No, we come in many different shapes, sizes, and colors, but none quite as unique as you." As he spoke, Stephen's perception of Sarah's appearance began to shift. What he had initially seen as mottled scales revealed themselves to be intricate patterns, shimmering with bioluminescence in the low light. Fascinated, he reached out, hesitating for a moment before Sarah nodded her assent. His fingers traced the patterns on her arm, marveling at their complexity. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through both of them. Stephen's breath caught in his throat as he met Sarah's gaze, seeing a reflection of his own wonder and attraction. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by raised voices outside. Sarah's expression darkened as she listened to the heated discussion. "What is it?" Stephen asked, tension creeping into his voice. Sarah's eyes met his, worry evident in their depths. "They speak of an attack on your people. We must warn them." Without hesitation, they gathered what supplies they could and slipped out of the settlement under the cover of darkness. The bioluminescent forest pulsed with eerie light as they made their way through the alien terrain. Their journey was fraught with danger. At one point, they found themselves at the edge of a swiftly flowing river, its waters glowing with an otherworldly blue light. "We have to cross," Stephen said, eyeing the turbulent current. Sarah nodded, her scales shimmering with perseverance. Together, they linked arms and waded into the icy water. The current tugged at their legs, threatening to sweep them away. Stephen's foot slipped on a moss-covered rock, but Sarah's grip kept him upright. They emerged on the other side, soaked and breathless, but alive. As they continued their trek, a low growl stopped them in their tracks. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything Stephen had ever seen. It moved on 6 legs, its body covered in iridescent fur, with multiple eyes that glowed in the darkness. Sarah hissed a warning. "Zenther. Very dangerous." The creature lunged. Stephen and Sarah dove in opposite directions, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. Sarah grabbed a fallen branch, wielding it like a staff. Stephen searched frantically for a weapon, his hand closing around a jagged stone. Working in tandem, they fended off the beast. Sarah's knowledge of its weak points and Stephen's quick thinking allowed them to drive it back into the forest. As the adrenaline faded, they found themselves in each other's arms, hearts racing. "We make a good team," Stephen said softly. Sarah's patterns pulsed in agreement. "Yes, we do." As they neared the human settlement, a shout rang out. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" Stephen recognized the voice immediately. "Marcus, it's me, Stephen." Lieutenant Marcus Chen stepped into view, his weapon trained on Sarah. "Stephen, what is that thing with you?" Stephen moved protectively in front of Sarah. "She's not a thing, Marcus. This is Sarah. She saved my life." Marcus's eyes darted between them, confusion and suspicion warring on his face. "Step away from it, Stephen. We don't know if it's dangerous." Stephen corrected firmly, "and she's here to help us. We have important information about an impending attack." The tension was palpable as Stephen worked to defuse the situation. Finally, Marcus lowered his weapon, though his posture remained wary. "Captain Reeves will want to hear this. Follow me." As they entered the colony, all eyes turned to Sarah. Whispers and gasps followed them as they made their way to the command center. Stephen felt Sarah's discomfort and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Captain Evelyn Reeves looked up as they entered, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Sarah. "Mr. Young, I see you've brought company. I hope you have a good explanation for this." Stephen took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "Captain, this is Sarah. She's a denobulan, and she has information that could save all our lives." As Stephen and Sarah recounted their experiences and warned of the coming danger, the room fell silent. The human leaders exchanged worried glances, the reality of their situation sinking in. "If what you say is true," Captain Reeves said slowly, "we need to prepare for a potential attack and find a way to communicate with the moderate denobulan faction." Stephen nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Sarah and I can help with that. We've developed a way to communicate." As the colony mobilized, Stephen found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. He worked tirelessly with Sarah to establish contact with the moderate denobulans, all while helping to fortify the settlement's defenses. Amidst the chaos, Stephen noticed the varied reactions to Sarah's presence. Some colonists regarded her with fascination, while others couldn't hide their fear or disgust. He felt a surge of protectiveness, challenging anyone who dared to treat her with disrespect. As night fell, a commotion at the edge of the settlement drew their attention. A group of denobulans had arrived, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. Stephen recognized the family resemblance immediately. Sarah's scales pulsed with a complex pattern of emotions. "My family," she whispered. The reunion was tense, filled with unspoken questions and lingering resentments. Sarah's parents struggled to comprehend her connection to the humans, their eyes darting between her and Stephen with poorly concealed disapproval. As the night wore on, the colony remained on high alert. Stephen and Sarah stood together at the perimeter, watching the bioluminescent forest for any sign of movement. The air was thick with anticipation, the future of human-denobulan relations hanging in the balance. Sarah's hand found Stephen's in the darkness. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we face it together." Stephen squeezed her hand, marveling at how natural it felt despite their physiological differences. As they stood watch, he realized that their unconventional bond might be the key to bridging the gap between their species, if they could survive the coming storm. Storm. The bioluminescent forest pulsed with an eerie rhythm, matching the tension that hung in the air. As dawn broke, Captain Reeves called an emergency meeting of the colony's leadership. Stephen and Sarah stood before the assembled group, acutely aware of the suspicious glances directed at the denobulan woman. "Mr. Young," Captain Reeves began, her voice firm but tinged with exhaustion, "your actions have put us in a precarious position. However, your warning may have saved countless lives." She paused, her eyes moving from Stephen to Sarah. "Given the unique circumstances, I'm appointing you as our official liaison to the denobulans. Your connection with Sarah will be invaluable in navigating this crisis." A murmur of discontent rippled through the room. Lieutenant Marcus Chen stepped forward, his face twisted with barely concealed disgust. "Captain, with all due respect, we can't trust our survival to an alien. For all we know, this could be an elaborate trap." Stephen felt Sarah tense beside him. He opened his mouth to object, but Captain Reeves silenced him with a raised hand. "Your concerns are noted, Lieutenant, but we're out of options. Mr. Young and Sarah have demonstrated their commitment to our colony's safety. They're our best chance at avoiding further bloodshed." As the meeting dispersed, Stephen and Sarah found themselves at the center of a growing storm of emotions. Some colonists approached them with cautious curiosity, while others kept their distance, fear and mistrust evident in their eyes. Their moment of relative calm was shattered by the arrival of a denobulan delegation at the colony's gates. At its head stood a tall, imposing figure with scales that shimmered like polished obsidian. Sarah's bioluminescent patterns flickered with recognition and a hint of dread. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zoran, Sarah's father and a respected elder among the moderate denobulans, strode into the colony with an air of authority. His eyes locked onto Sarah, a mixture of relief and disappointment evident in his gaze. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying across the tense silence that had fallen over the assembled humans and denobulans, "it is time for you to return to your people. Your dalliance with these off-worlders has gone on long enough." Stephen instinctively stepped closer to Sarah, his hand brushing against hers. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to," he said, meeting Zoran's determined eyes. Zoran's scales rippled with barely suppressed anger. "This is not your concern, human. Sarah's association with your kind threatens the delicate balance we've maintained for generations. She must return to fulfill her duties to our society." Sarah's patterns pulsed with defiance. "I have no place in a society that cast me out for being different," she said, her voice stronger than Stephen had ever heard it. "My place is here, helping to build a future where our species can coexist." The standoff was interrupted by the sudden blare of alarms. Captain Reeves's voice crackled over the colony's communication system. "All personnel to battle stations. Hostile forces approaching from the northeast." In the chaos that followed, Stephen and Sarah found themselves thrust into the heart of the colony's defense efforts. As they raced to the perimeter, Sarah's eyes widened with sudden insight. "Stephen, wait!" she called out, grabbing his arm. "The bioluminescent flora. We can use it to create an early warning system." Understanding dawned on Stephen's face. "Of course, the patterns change in response to movement and heat signatures. If we can calibrate our sensors to detect those changes..." They worked feverishly, combining human technology with Sarah's knowledge of denobulan biology. As the hostile forces drew nearer, a network of living sensors spread through the surrounding forest, giving the colony precious extra minutes to prepare. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. Energy weapons seared the air, their alien whine punctuated by the all-too-human sounds of screams and explosions. Stephen and Sarah found themselves on the front lines, coordinating the defense with a seamless efficiency that belied their short time together. In the midst of the chaos, Stephen spotted a denobulan warrior taking aim at Sarah. Without hesitation, he threw himself in front of her, crying out as the energy blast caught him in the shoulder. He crumpled to the ground, the world spinning around him. Sarah's face swam into view, her patterns pulsing with fear and grit. "Stay with me, Stephen," she urged, her hands moving with practiced precision over his wound. The pain in his shoulder gave way to a strange, tingling warmth as Sarah applied denobulan healing techniques. As Stephen's vision cleared, he saw that the tide of battle had turned. The colony's defenses, bolstered by the early warning system and the unexpected alliance with Sarah's family, had repelled the attack. Among the captured enemy forces was a striking figure, Krell, the xenophobic warlord who had led the assault. In the aftermath of the battle, Stephen found himself in the colony's medical bay, Sarah by his side. Dr. Elena Rodriguez approached them, her expression a mixture of professional curiosity and personal concern. "How are you feeling, Stephen?" she asked, checking his vitals. "Like I've been hit by a shuttlecraft," he groaned, "but alive, thanks to Sarah." Dr. Rodriguez's eyes moved from Stephen to Sarah, then back again. "Your intervention was remarkable," she said to Sarah. "I've never seen anything like it. If you're willing, I'd like to study the physiological interactions between your species. The implications could be significant." Stephen and Sarah exchanged a long look, unspoken emotions passing between them. The weight of their decision hung in the air, charged with the potential to reshape the future of both their species. "We'll do it," Stephen said finally, his hand finding Sarah's. "Whatever the consequences, we're in this together." As they agreed to participate in Dr. Rodriguez's study, neither Stephen nor Sarah could shake the feeling that they were stepping into uncharted territory. The path ahead was fraught with danger, not just from hostile denobulans, but from those on both sides who feared the implications of their growing bond. With the colony still reeling from the attack, Captain Reeves summoned Stephen and Sarah to her office. Her face was grim as she outlined their next mission, a journey into the heart of denobulan territory to forge an alliance with progressive factions. As they prepared for their perilous journey, Stephen and Sarah stood at the edge of the colony, looking out at the bioluminescent forest that pulsed with alien life. The unknown lay before them, filled with both promise and peril. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them side by side, two beings from different worlds united by a bond that defied the boundaries of species. Species. Stephen and Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance, their hands still intertwined. The weight of their decision settled upon them as they turned to face the bioluminescent forest that stretched out before them. With a deep breath, they took their first steps into the unknown. The journey to Zarx proved treacherous from the start. They navigated through dense undergrowth, the vegetation pulsing with an otherworldly glow that cast eerie shadows across their path. Stephen marveled at Sarah's natural ability to blend in with their surroundings, her scales shifting to match the patterns of light and dark around them. As they approached a series of steep canyons, Stephen's heart raced. The chasms yawned before them, seemingly impassable. Sarah, however, moved with confidence, her knowledge of denobulan terrain evident in every step. "We'll need to create makeshift bridges," she explained, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with concentration. "The vines here are strong enough to support our weight." Working together, they fashioned crude rope bridges, testing each one carefully before crossing. Stephen's stomach lurched as he made his way across the first canyon, the bridge swaying beneath his feet. Sarah's reassuring presence beside him kept him focused. Their teamwork was put to the test as they encountered a field of geothermal vents. Steam hissed from cracks in the ground, the air thick with sulfurous fumes. Sarah's expertise proved invaluable as she guided them through the hazardous terrain. "Step exactly where I step," she instructed, her scales pulsing with urgency. The ground here is unstable, and a wrong move could trigger an eruption. As they picked their way through the field, Stephen found himself hyper-aware of Sarah's movements. The grace with which she navigated the dangerous landscape was mesmerizing. In the dim light, her bioluminescent patterns seemed to dance across her skin, creating a hypnotic display that left Stephen breathless. Their nights were spent huddled together for warmth, the long hours of darkness on Denobula Prime stretching out endlessly. In these quiet moments, Stephen became acutely conscious of Sarah's alien physiology, the smooth texture of her scales, the gentle pulsing of her bioluminescence, the unique contours of her body. He found himself drawn to her in ways he had never anticipated. As they neared the outskirts of Zarx, the sound of snapping twigs alerted them to danger. Before Stephen could react, Sarah had melted into the surrounding vegetation, her scales perfectly mimicking the bioluminescent flora. A group of Denobulan scouts, their weapons at the ready, burst into the clearing. Stephen tensed, preparing for a fight, when suddenly Sarah appeared behind the group. With swift, precise movements, she disarmed two of the scouts before they could even turn around. Stephen sprang into action, using the hand-to-hand combat techniques he'd learned in training. Together, he and Sarah subdued the remaining scouts, their movements synchronized as if they'd been fighting side by side for years. As the last scout fell, Stephen turned to Sarah, awe evident in his expression. "That was incredible," he breathed, realizing how he had underestimated her capabilities. Sarah's scales rippled with a pattern that Stephen recognized as pride, mixed with a hint of amusement. "I told you I could handle myself," she said, a smile in her voice. Their moment of triumph was short-lived as the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. They turned to see a Denobulan border patrol emerging from the forest, led by a striking female officer. "I am Commander Lyrax," the officer announced, her eyes moving between Stephen and Sarah with undisguised curiosity. "Your presence here is unexpected." Stephen stepped forward, his hand unconsciously reaching for Sarah's. "We're here on a diplomatic mission," he explained. "We seek an audience with Elder Vex." Lyrax's scales shimmered with interest. A human and a Denobulan, working together? Fascinating. She gestured for them to follow. "I will escort you to Zarx myself. Your safety and your activities are now my responsibility." As they entered the neutral city, Stephen and Sarah found themselves at the center of intense scrutiny. Denobulans of all ages stopped to stare at the unlikely pair, their bioluminescent patterns flickering with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Elder Vex received them in a chamber filled with pulsating bioluminescent plants. The ancient Denobulan scales were dull with age, but his eyes sparkled with keen intelligence. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Your arrival marks a pivotal moment in our history." As Vex began to explain his faction's research into human Denobulan compatibility, Stephen felt a mix of shock and excitement course through him. The possibility of interbreeding, of creating a new subspecies, was beyond anything he had imagined. He glanced at Sarah, seeing his own conflicting emotions reflected in the complex patterns rippling across her scales. The idea of potentially conceiving a child together filled him with both exhilaration and terror. Their contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the human colony. Dr. Rodriguez's face appeared on a holographic display, her expression grave. "Stephen, Sarah, I've made a breakthrough in the compatibility study," she announced. "Human and Denobulan DNA can combine, but the process is highly unstable. The risks to both mother and child are significant." As Stephen absorbed this information, another message came through, this time from Captain Reeves. Her voice was tight with tension as she delivered the news of Colonel Hartley's coup. "The situation here is critical," Reeves warned. "Hartley has taken control of our communications array and is broadcasting anti-Denobulan propaganda. We need you back here now." Stephen turned to Sarah, seeing the tenacity in her eyes that matched his own. They had come too far, risked too much to turn back now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Elder Vex stepped forward, his ancient face set with drive. "I have a proposal," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We can provide you with a team of our most elite commandos. Together, You may be able to infiltrate the colony and neutralize Hartley's forces. As preparations for the mission began in earnest, Stephen and Sarah found a moment alone. They stood on a balcony overlooking the bioluminescent cityscape of Zarx, the beauty of the alien world, a stark contrast to the danger that lay ahead. "Sarah," Stephen began, his voice soft, "whatever happens, I want you to know." Sarah placed a finger on his lips, her scales pulsing with a pattern he now recognized as affection. "I know," she said simply. "We'll talk about it when this is over. For now, let's focus on the mission." As they boarded the stealth transport vessel with the Denobulan commando team, Stephen felt a surge of persistence. The fate of two species rested on their shoulders, but in that moment, all he could think about was the feel of Sarah's hand in his and the promise of a future they had yet to explore. The transport's engines hummed to life, and as they lifted off into the bioluminescent night, Stephen knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Sarah would face them together. Together. As the transport vessel soared through the bioluminescent night sky, Stephen's mind raced with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. The journey to the human colony was tense but swift. As they approached their destination, Commander Zarx briefed the team on their infiltration strategy. "We'll use Sarah's camouflage abilities to our advantage," she explained, her scales pulsing with a pattern that Stephen had come to recognize as tenacity. Under the cover of darkness, they landed silently on the outskirts of the colony. Sarah's scales shifted, blending seamlessly with the surrounding vegetation. She took Stephen's hand, guiding him through the shadows as the Denobulan commandos followed close behind. They moved swiftly through the colony's perimeter, avoiding the patrols set up by Hartley's forces. Stephen's heart pounded in his chest as they narrowly avoided detection several times, Sarah's quick thinking and natural camouflage saving them from discovery. As they neared the main communications array, a sudden shout rang out. "Intruders!" A patrol had spotted one of the Denobulan commandos. Chaos erupted. Hartley's men poured out of nearby buildings, weapons drawn. Stephen and Sarah found themselves separated from the main group in the confusion. "Quick, in here!" Sarah hissed, pulling Stephen into a narrow maintenance shaft. They squeezed inside, their bodies pressed tightly together in the confined space. Stephen could feel the rapid rise and fall of Sarah's chest against his own, her scales cool against his skin. In the darkness of the shaft, Stephen became acutely aware of Sarah's alien physiology. The soft glow of her bioluminescent patterns illuminated her face, highlighting the curve of her jaw, the arch of her brow. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos outside faded away. Stephen felt a surge of attraction so powerful it left him breathless. He could see the same desire reflected in Sarah's eyes, her scales pulsing with a pattern he had never seen before. Their faces were inches apart, their breath mingling in the small space. For a heartbeat, Stephen considered closing that distance, giving in to the tension that had been building between them. But the sound of boots on metal snapped them both back to reality. "We need to focus on the mission," Sarah whispered, her voice strained. Stephen nodded, pushing aside his feelings. "You're right. Let's find a way to the communications array." They carefully made their way through the maintenance system, emerging near their target. The scene before them was one of controlled chaos. The Denobulan commandos, led by Commander Zarx, were engaged in a firefight with Hartley's forces. Stephen's communicator buzzed with an incoming message. It was Dr. Rodriguez, her voice filled with excitement. "Stephen, I've made a breakthrough. The hormone treatment, it could stabilize human Denobulan DNA combination. The risks, they're significantly reduced." The implications of this news hit Stephen like a shockwave, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. "Copy that, Doctor. We'll discuss this later." He turned to Sarah, who had overheard the message. Her scales rippled with a complex pattern of emotions. "Later," she agreed, her voice soft but firm. They spotted an opening, a ventilation shaft that led directly into the communications array. With a nod to each other, they began their ascent, their movements in perfect sync. Inside the facility, they navigated through a maze of corridors until they reached the main control room. There, surrounded by banks of computers and communication equipment, stood Colonel Hartley. The colonel spun around, his face contorting with rage as he recognized the intruders. "You!" he snarled, reaching for his weapon. Stephen and Sarah moved as one. Sarah's tail whipped out, knocking the gun from Hartley's hand, while Stephen closed the distance, grappling with the colonel. They tumbled to the ground, trading blows. Hartley was a trained soldier, his movements precise and powerful, but he was unprepared for the seamless teamwork of his opponents. As Stephen blocked a punch, Sarah swept Hartley's legs out from under him. When Hartley tried to roll away, Stephen pinned him down while Sarah disabled the communications equipment. In a matter of minutes, it was over. Hartley lay subdued on the floor, the array dark and silent around them. Stephen helped Sarah to her feet, their hands lingering together for a moment longer than necessary. With the array under their control, Stephen activated the emergency broadcast system. His voice rang out across the colony and beyond, reaching both human and denobulan ears. "This is Stephen Marshall. Colonel Hartley's actions were those of a rogue element, not representative of human intentions. The coup has been neutralized. We stand here today as proof that humans and denobulans can work together, can trust each other. We are stronger united than divided." Sarah stepped forward, her presence beside Stephen a powerful symbol. "I am Sarah of the denobulan people. What Stephen says is true. We have fought side by side, bled together. Our differences are not obstacles, but opportunities. Let this be the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our species." As their words echoed across Denobula Prime, Stephen and Sarah exchanged a glance. The challenges ahead were numerous, but in that moment, facing them together seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Inevitable. The weight of their shared experiences, the intensity of their connection, and the promise of a future together filled them both with a sense of purpose. As they stepped off the transport vessel, Stephen and Sarah were immediately whisked away by Dr. Rodriguez's medical team. The doctor's excitement was palpable as she ushered them into the newly established research facility. "We need to begin the tests immediately," Dr. Rodriguez explained, her eyes bright with scientific curiosity. "The potential implications of your compatibility are astounding." Stephen and Sarah exchanged a glance, their hands finding each other as they followed the doctor into a sterile laboratory. The room was filled with an array of advanced medical equipment, much of it a fusion of human and denobulan technology. "First, we'll need to monitor your physiological responses to various stimuli," Dr. Rodriguez said, gesturing for them to sit on adjacent examination tables. "This will involve some close proximity." As the medical team attached sensors to their bodies, Stephen couldn't help but notice the way Sarah's scales shimmered in the bright light of the lab. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed gently, a mesmerizing display that he found increasingly difficult to look away from. "Now," Dr. Rodriguez's voice cut through his thoughts, "we're going to ask you to perform a series of coordinated movements. It's crucial that you maintain physical contact throughout the exercise." Stephen and Sarah stood, their bodies mere inches apart. As they began the sequence of movements, Stephen felt an electric current run through him at every point of contact with Sarah's skin. Her scales were cool and smooth against his palms, her alien physiology both familiar and thrillingly foreign. As they moved in sync, their breathing fell into rhythm, hearts beating in tandem. Stephen felt a surge of something primal and powerful coursing through his veins. He glanced at Sarah and saw her scales flickering with a pattern he had never seen before, her eyes wide and pupils dilated. Dr. Rodriguez's voice seemed to come from far away. "Extraordinary," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the readouts streaming across her screens. "Their hormonal levels are off the charts. It's as if their bodies are adapting to each other on a cellular level." The intensity of the moment was overwhelming. Stephen felt dizzy, his senses hyper-aware of every subtle shift in Sarah's body, every minute change in her bioluminescent patterns. He could see the same overwhelming sensation reflected in her eyes. Suddenly, an alarm blared from one of the monitoring devices. Dr. Rodriguez rushed over, her expression a mix of shock and excitement. "This is unprecedented," she breathed. "Stephen's body is producing compounds that perfectly complement Sarah's unique biology, and vice versa. It's as if they're evolving in real time to become more compatible." The implications of her words hit Stephen like a physical force. He looked at Sarah, seeing the same realization dawning in her eyes. This wasn't just about diplomatic relations or scientific curiosity anymore. What was happening between them had the potential to change everything. As the medical team buzzed around them, taking samples and running more tests, Stephen and Sarah remained rooted in place, their hands still clasped together. The connection between them felt unbreakable, a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. News of their unprecedented compatibility spread like wildfire through the colony and beyond. Within hours, Stephen and Sarah found themselves at the center of a galactic controversy. Debates raged in both human and denobulan communities about the implications of their potential union. Jake Harrison, ever the diplomat, saw an opportunity. He approached Stephen and Sarah as they left the medical facility, his expression a mixture of excitement and calculation. "We need to capitalize on this," he said without preamble. "A public ceremony to formalize your union could be a powerful symbol of cooperation between our species." Stephen felt Sarah tense beside him. "We haven't even had time to process this ourselves," she said, her scales flickering with a pattern that Stephen recognized as discomfort. Before Harrison could respond, they were approached by a group of denobulan scientists led by a stern-faced individual who introduced himself as Dr. Zarx. "We have a proposal," he said, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "Your genetic material could be the key to creating the first human denobulan hybrid embryo in a controlled laboratory setting." Stephen's mind reeled at the implications. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Sarah tugged on his arm. "We need time," she said firmly, addressing both Harrison and Dr. Zarx. "This isn't a decision to be made lightly." As they walked away, leaving the clamoring voices behind, Stephen felt the weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. He looked at Sarah, taking in the complex emotions playing across her features, visible in the ever-changing patterns of her bioluminescence. They found themselves in a quiet corner of the colony, away from prying eyes and eager scientists. For a moment, they simply stood in silence, processing the whirlwind of events that had brought them to this point. "Sarah," Stephen began, his voice low and intense, "I know we haven't had much time to talk about us, but after everything we've been through, everything we've learned—" He trailed off as Sarah stepped closer, her scales pulsing with a pattern he now recognized as desire. Their bodies seemed to move of their own accord, drawn together by a force as powerful as gravity itself. Their lips met in a kiss that was both alien and achingly familiar. Stephen's hands traced the contours of Sarah's face, marveling at the feel of her scales beneath his fingertips. Sarah's tail wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer, as her bioluminescent patterns flared with an intensity that lit up the dim corridor. As they broke apart, breathless and flushed, Stephen knew that their lives had irrevocably changed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would face them together. Little did they know that at that very moment, deep within Sarah's body, a miracle was taking place. A single cell, a perfect fusion of human and denobulan DNA, had begun to divide. The future they had only dared to imagine was already taking shape, bringing with it the promise of a new era for both their species and the threat of those who would stop at nothing to prevent it. The promise of a new era for both their species was soon overshadowed by the need for secrecy and protection. Within days of their discovery, Stephen and Sarah were whisked away to a hidden location deep within denobulan territory. The facility, codenamed Haven, was a marvel of both human and denobulan engineering, designed to accommodate their unique needs and safeguard the miraculous life growing within Sarah. As they stepped into their new home, Stephen's hand instinctively found Sarah's. The sterile corridors and high-tech equipment were a stark contrast to the passionate moment they had shared just days ago. Dr. Rodriguez greeted them, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Welcome to Haven," she said, gesturing around the room. "We've set up everything to monitor Sarah's pregnancy and ensure both of your safety." Sarah's scales rippled with a pattern of nervousness as she took in their surroundings. "It feels so clinical," she murmured. Stephen squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's just temporary," he whispered. "We'll make it feel like home." As the weeks passed, Sarah's body underwent remarkable changes. Her bioluminescent patterns became more intricate and vibrant, pulsing in mesmerizing synchronicity with the developing fetus. Stephen found himself captivated by the display, often spending hours watching the swirling lights dance across Sarah's skin. One morning, as Dr. Rodriguez conducted her daily checkup, she gasped in surprise. "This is extraordinary," she exclaimed, her eyes wide as she studied the holographic display. "The fetus is developing at an accelerated rate. Its neural structure, I've never seen anything like it." Before Stephen or Sarah could respond, the door slid open, revealing a stern-faced denobulan scientist. "Dr. Zarx," Dr. Rodriguez said, her tone cautious. "I wasn't aware you had clearance to be here." The denobulan's eyes gleamed with nearly unleashed excitement as he approached Sarah. "Elder Vex granted me access," he explained. "My expertise in denobulan genetics could prove crucial in ensuring the health of this unique child." Stephen stepped protectively closer to Sarah, noting the way her scales flickered with unease. "And what exactly do you hope to contribute, Doctor?" he asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Dr. Zyrex's lips curved into a thin smile. "Why, to unlock the full potential of this miraculous union, of course. The scientific implications are staggering." As tensions simmered within Haven, the outside world grew increasingly volatile. Reports of attacks on denobulan settlements near the human colony flooded in, the work of extremists calling themselves the Purity Front. Stephen watched the news feeds with growing concern, knowing that these acts of violence were just a smokescreen for something far more insidious. Sergeant Maria Torres, the head of Haven's security, strode into the room, her face grim. "We've detected a potential security breach," she announced. "Someone's been snooping around our systems, trying to pinpoint our location." Stephen felt a chill run down his spine. "How bad is it?" Torres's face hardened. "Bad enough. We're implementing new security protocols immediately. No one gets in or out without triple verification." As the days wore on, Stephen found himself undergoing changes of his own. His body began producing unique pheromones that seemed to have a calming effect on Sarah and the unborn child. Dr. Rodriguez theorized that it was an adaptive response to their unprecedented biological compatibility. One night, as Stephen lay beside Sarah, his hand resting on her swollen abdomen, he felt a powerful kick. Sarah's scales lit up in a brilliant display of color, and she gasped in surprise. "Stephen," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. I think it's time." Before Stephen could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. Sergeant Torres's voice crackled over the intercom, urgent and tense. "We're under attack. Multiple hostiles approaching from all sides. This is not a drill. All personnel to battle stations." Stephen leapt to his feet, his heart pounding. He looked at Sarah, her scales pulsing rapidly with fear and excitement. The moment they had both dreaded and longed for had arrived, amidst chaos and danger. As the sounds of combat echoed through Haven's corridors, Stephen knew that the next few hours would determine not just their fate, but the future of human denobulan relations. With one last loving glance at Sarah, he steeled himself for the battle to come, ready to defend his family and the new life they had created against impossible odds. As Stephen turned to face the imminent threat, the facility shuddered under the force of an explosion. "We need to move now!" Sergeant Torres shouted, bursting into the room. Her face was streaked with sweat and grime, her uniform singed from a near miss. Stephen's mind raced, torn between the instinct to fight and the need to protect Sarah. "What's our status?" he demanded, helping Sarah to her feet. Torres's expression was grim. "Multiple hostiles breaching the outer perimeter. We've got a mix of human extremists and denobulan purists. They're using some kind of advanced biotech to bypass our security systems." Dr. Rodriguez rushed in, her eyes wide with concern. "We need to get Sarah to the medical bay immediately. The stress is accelerating her pregnancy. We may need to perform an emergency C-section." Stephen felt his heart clench with fear. He looked at Sarah, her scales pulsing rapidly with a mix of pain and commitment. "I'm here," he assured her, squeezing her hand. "We'll get through this." As they hurried through the corridors, Stephen could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the facility. The security team had taken up defensive positions, exchanging fire with the invaders. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of weapons discharge. They reached the medical bay just as another explosion rocked the building. Dr. Rodriguez and her team sprang into action, preparing Sarah for the procedure. Stephen stood by, feeling helpless as he watched the monitors displaying Sarah's vital signs. "Stephen," Torres called from the doorway, "I need you. We're setting up a last line of defense and I could use your engineering expertise." He hesitated, looking back at Sarah. She nodded, her scales flickering with understanding. "Go," she said softly. "Keep us safe." With a heavy heart, Stephen followed Torres out into the chaos. They worked quickly, using whatever materials they could find to reinforce weak points and create improvised traps for the invaders. Stephen's mind was in overdrive, applying his knowledge of the facility's systems to create unexpected obstacles for the attackers. As they worked, Dr. Zarx appeared, his face flushed with excitement despite the dire situation. "I have something that might help," he announced, holding up a small device. "A prototype defense system based on the hybrid child's bioluminescent properties. If we can adapt it quickly enough, it might buy us some time." Stephen eyed the device skeptically but nodded. "Let's do it. Anything that gives us an edge." They worked feverishly, integrating Zarx's prototype into the facility's systems. As the last connection was made, the lights flickered and a soft, pulsing glow began to emanate from the walls. Suddenly, a group of attackers rounded the corner, weapons raised. Before anyone could react, the prototype activated, emitting a blinding flash of bioluminescence. The attackers stumbled, momentarily disoriented, giving Torres and her team the opening they needed to neutralize the threat. "It works!" Zarx exclaimed, his eyes shining with pride. But Stephen was already running back to the medical bay, driven by an overwhelming sense of urgency. He burst through the doors just as Dr. Rodriguez was completing the procedure. The room was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the steady beep of medical equipment. Then a cry pierced the air, strong, defiant, and utterly unique. Stephen's breath caught in his throat as he saw his daughter for the first time. Her skin shimmered with a subtle, iridescent pattern, a perfect blend of human and denobulan traits. Her eyes, when they opened, were startlingly alert, taking in the world around her with an intensity that seemed beyond that of a newborn. As Stephen cradled his daughter, marveling at the miracle of her existence, the doors to the medical bay slammed open. A group of attackers stormed in, weapons raised. In a split second, Stephen made a decision. He turned, shielding Sarah and the baby with his own body, bracing for the impact of weapons fire. But it never came. Instead, the room was suddenly filled with an intense pulsating light. Stephen turned, astonished to see his newborn daughter emitting a powerful bioluminescent glow. The attackers staggered back, momentarily blinded, giving Torres and her team the opening they needed to rush in and subdue them. As the immediate threat passed, Stephen looked down at his daughter in awe. Her bioluminescence faded, leaving her looking like any other newborn, albeit one with slightly shimmering skin. Dr. Rodriguez approached, her face a mix of wonder and scientific curiosity. "Remarkable," she breathed, running a scanner over the infant. "Her abilities seem to be developing at an accelerated rate. We'll need to monitor her closely." Before Stephen could respond, the facility's communication system crackled to life. Captain Reeves's voice filled the room, tense but controlled. "Haven, this is Captain Reeves. We're inbound with a joint human denobulan task force. Hold on, we're coming." A wave of relief washed over Stephen. He looked at Sarah, exhausted but radiant, then down at their daughter. In that moment, despite the chaos surrounding them, he felt a profound sense of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family and as a bridge between two worlds. As the sounds of reinforcements approaching echoed through the facility, Stephen knew that this was just the beginning. The birth of their daughter had changed everything, opening up possibilities that neither humans nor denobulans had ever imagined. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since the attack began, Stephen allowed himself to believe that it might also be bright. Bright with hope and possibility. In the weeks following the attack on Haven, Stephen and Sarah found themselves adjusting to a new reality. The colonial government, recognizing the need for increased security, had relocated them to a more fortified facility dubbed Sanctuary. As they settled into their new home, Stephen couldn't help but marvel at how quickly their lives had changed. Aurora, their daughter, grew at an astonishing rate. At just 3 weeks old, she was already displaying cognitive abilities far beyond what either of her parents had expected. Stephen watched in amazement as Aurora's skin rippled with subtle bioluminescent patterns, her tiny hands reaching out to grasp at the air. "She's trying to communicate," Sarah said softly, her own scales shimmering with a mix of pride and wonder. Dr. Rodriguez entered the room, her face alight with excitement. "You're right," she confirmed, holding up a tablet displaying Aurora's latest test results. Her brain activity suggests she's developing a unique form of communication, combining vocalizations with those bioluminescent patterns. Stephen leaned in, fascinated. What does this mean for her development? Before Dr. Rodriguez could answer, Jake Harrison, the human diplomat, strode into the room. His presence had become a common sight at Sanctuary, as he worked tirelessly to leverage Aurora's existence for the benefit of human-denobulan relations. "It means we have an unprecedented opportunity," Harrison said, his eyes gleaming with possibility. "I've just proposed a joint scientific and cultural exchange program to the colonial government. Aurora's abilities could be the key to fostering real understanding between our species." As Harrison outlined his plans, Stephen felt a mix of pride and apprehension. He glanced at Sarah, noting the way her scales flickered with unease. They had agreed to participate in controlled public appearances with Aurora, hoping to normalize the idea of interspecies families, but the thought of their daughter being at the center of such intense scrutiny was daunting. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Torres, her face grim. "We need to talk," she said, gesturing for Stephen to follow her into the hallway. Once they were alone, Torres lowered her voice. "I've uncovered evidence suggesting the attack on Haven wasn't just the work of extremists. There may be someone high up in the colonial government involved." Stephen felt his blood run cold. "Are you sure?" Torres nodded. "I'm still investigating, but I wanted you to be aware. Keep your eyes open." As Stephen processed this new information, Dr. Zarx approached, his eyes gleaming with that familiar mix of scientific curiosity and terrifying excitement. "I've been analyzing Aurora's latest test results," he said, holding up a datapad. "I believe we have an opportunity to explore the full extent of her capabilities through a series of carefully designed experiments." Stephen felt a surge of protectiveness. "She's not a lab specimen, Doctor," he said, his voice tight. Before Zarx could respond, an alert sounded throughout the facility. Captain Reeves' voice came over the intercom, tense but controlled. "Attention all personnel. We have an incoming delegation from Earth led by Admiral Chen. Prepare for their arrival." As the facility buzzed with activity, Stephen made his way back to Sarah and Aurora. He found them with Elder Vex, who was outlining his proposal for a harmony zone, a neutral area where humans and denobulans could interact freely. "It could be a symbol of cooperation," Vex explained, his weathered face hopeful. "A place where our two species can learn to coexist peacefully." Stephen nodded, intrigued by the idea, but his mind was racing with the implications of Torres's revelation and the impending arrival of the Earth delegation. As he cradled Aurora in his arms, he felt her tiny hand press against his chest, her skin glowing softly. In that moment, he was struck by a powerful realization. His daughter, this miraculous blend of two species, might hold the key to navigating the complex political landscape they now faced. The sound of shuttles landing outside pulled Stephen from his thoughts. He exchanged a look with Sarah, both of them steeling themselves for what was to come. As they prepared to meet Admiral Chen and his delegation, Stephen knew that the next few hours would be crucial in shaping not just their future, but the future of human-denobulan relations. With Aurora secure in Sarah's arms, they made their way to the reception area. The door slid open, revealing Admiral Chen and his entourage. The Admiral's eyes immediately locked onto Aurora, his expression unreadable. Stephen took a deep breath, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to protect his family and work towards a future where humans and denobulans could truly coexist. Coexist peacefully. As Stephen contemplated this vision of harmony, the facility's doors slid open, revealing Admiral Chen and his entourage. The Admiral's piercing gaze immediately locked onto Aurora, his expression a carefully controlled mask of neutrality. Stephen felt Sarah tense beside him, her scales flickering with unease. Captain Reeves stepped forward, her voice steady as she made introductions. Admiral Chen, welcome to Sanctuary. Allow me to introduce Stephen Clark, Sarah, and their daughter, Aurora. Chen nodded curtly, his eyes never leaving the child. Thank you, Captain. I trust you understand the sensitive nature of my visit. I'd like to speak with the family privately, effective immediately. Stephen exchanged a glance with Sarah, both sensing the gravity of the situation. They followed Admiral Chen and his aides to a secure conference room, the tension palpable as the doors sealed behind them. Once seated, Chen wasted no time in revealing his true purpose. Mr. Clark, Sarah, I'll be direct. Earth's government has growing concerns about the potential military applications of human denobulin hybrids like Aurora. We believe it's in everyone's best interest to relocate your family to a specialized facility on Earth for further study and protection. Stephen felt his heart rate spike, his protective instincts flaring. With all due respect, Admiral, we've built a life here. Aurora needs stability, not to be treated like a lab specimen. Sarah's scales pulsed with a mix of fear and defiance. We appreciate your concern, but we cannot agree to this. Our daughter is not a weapon to be studied and potentially exploited. Admiral Chen's eyes narrowed, his tone hardening. I understand your reservations, but I'm afraid this isn't a request. If necessary, we're prepared to invoke emergency powers to ensure compliance. The threat hung in the air, suffocating in its implications. Stephen's mind raced, seeking a way out of this impossible situation. Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility, startling everyone in the room. Captain Reeves's voice crackled over the intercom, tense and urgent. Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel on high alert. Chaos erupted as security teams rushed to respond. In the confusion, Stephen locked eyes with Sarah, a silent understanding passing between them. They needed to act, and fast. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Stephen scooped up Aurora and bolted for the door, Sarah close behind. They slipped into the corridor, hearts pounding as they navigated the suddenly unfamiliar halls of their home. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Sergeant Torres. Her eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with drive. This way, she hissed, gesturing toward a service corridor. I've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy involving someone in Reeves's staff. We need to get you out of here. Without hesitation, Stephen and Sarah followed Torres through a maze of maintenance tunnels and rarely used passages. The distant sounds of pursuit echoed behind them, spurring them onward. As they neared the outskirts of the facility, Torres handed them a small device. Biocamouflage, she explained hurriedly. It'll help mask your signatures. Head for the bioluminescent forest to the east. I'll try to buy you some time. Stephen gripped Torres's arm, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. With a final nod, Torres disappeared back the way they had come. Stephen and Sarah activated the biocamouflage, feeling a strange tingling sensation as their appearances shifted to blend with their surroundings. They emerged from Sanctuary under the cover of darkness, the bioluminescent forest beckoning in the distance. As they made their way across the open ground, alarms blared behind them, searchlights cutting through the night. Suddenly, Aurora stirred in Stephen's arms, her tiny face scrunching in concentration. To their amazement, she began to emit a soft, pulsating glow. The light spread outward, creating a dazzling array of colors and patterns that momentarily disoriented their pursuers. Taking advantage of the distraction, Stephen and Sarah plunged into the forest, the bioluminescent flora providing additional cover. As they ventured deeper into the alien wilderness, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. Finally, they paused to catch their breath in a small clearing. Stephen looked at Sarah, her scales shimmering with a mix of fear and drive in the ethereal light of the forest. Aurora nestled between them, cooed softly, her skin still faintly glowing. What now? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the strange melodic sounds of the nocturnal forest life. Stephen took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. We keep moving, we find allies, and we figure out a way to protect our daughter and bring the truth to light. 2. As they prepared to press on into the unknown, the bioluminescent forest seemed to pulse around them, as if in sympathy with their plight. In the distance, they could hear the faint sounds of vehicles and raised voices as the search for them intensified. Stephen and Sarah shared a look of commitment, knowing that their actions would have far-reaching consequences for both their family and the delicate balance between humans and denobulans. With Aurora secure between them, they set off deeper into the glowing wilderness, their future uncertain, but their dedication unshaken. Unwaveringly resolute. With a final glance back at the facility that had been their home, they plunged into the bioluminescent forest. The dense foliage enveloped them, a riot of colors pulsing and swirling in the darkness. Stephen's heart raced as he led the way, Sarah close behind with Aurora cradled against her chest. The alien flora seemed to respond to their presence, tendrils of light reaching out as if curious about the newcomers. As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, Aurora's skin began to change. Stephen noticed it first, a subtle shift in the patterns of light playing across her tiny form. He paused, watching in amazement as his daughter's bioluminescence began to mimic the surrounding plants. "Sarah, look," he whispered, gesturing to Aurora. Sarah's eyes widened, her own scales shimmering with a mix of wonder and concern. "She's adapting to the environment. It's happening so fast." They pressed on, their progress aided by Aurora's newfound camouflage. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but the family knew they couldn't afford to slow down. The forest itself seemed to conspire to aid their escape, dense undergrowth obscuring their trail and bioluminescent patterns shifting to mask their movements. Hours passed, the alien landscape a blur of glowing vegetation and strange, unseen creatures calling out in the darkness. Stephen's muscles ached, his lungs burning with exertion, but he refused to stop. Sarah showed no signs of fatigue, her denobulan physiology better suited to the harsh environment. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of purple and green, they stumbled upon something unexpected. Emerging from a tangle of luminous vines, they found themselves face to face with an ancient stone structure, its surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed with a faint, inner light. "What is this place?" Stephen breathed, reaching out to touch the cool stone. Before Sarah could respond, Aurora let out a soft coo. To their astonishment, the symbols on the structure flared to life, responding to the child's presence. A hidden door slid open, revealing a dark passage leading into the earth. Stephen and Sarah exchanged a look of uncertainty. The ruins offered shelter, but they could also be a trap. As if sensing their hesitation, Aurora reached out toward the entrance, her tiny hand glowing softly. "I think she wants us to go in," Sarah said, her voice a mix of awe and trepidation. With no other options, they stepped into the passage. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the door slid shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. For a heart-stopping moment, panic threatened to overwhelm them. Then, one by one, lines of light began to appear along the walls, illuminating a vast chamber filled with technology unlike anything they had ever seen. Sleek consoles hummed to life, holographic displays flickering into existence. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols they had seen outside. "This must be some kind of denobulan outpost," Stephen said, his eyes darting from one marvel to the next. "But it looks far more advanced than anything I've seen in the colony." Sarah nodded, her scales pulsing with excitement. "This technology, it's beyond anything in our historical records. This place must be ancient." As they explored the chamber, Aurora began to squirm in Sarah's arms. The child reached out toward the central pedestal, her skin glowing brighter than ever. When Sarah hesitantly placed her on the smooth surface, Aurora's hands splayed out, making contact with the symbols. The entire room came alive. Holographic star maps exploded outward, filling the air with points of light. Strange, melodic tones echoed through the chamber, and the walls themselves seemed to ripple and shift. Stephen watched in awe as Aurora's eyes darted back and forth, taking in the flood of information. She's interfacing with the system somehow. It's responding to her hybrid DNA. Before they could process the implications of this discovery, a new sound caught their attention. Footsteps approaching from the passage they had entered through. Stephen tensed, ready to grab Aurora and run, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm. Wait, she whispered, her keen denobulan senses picking up something familiar in the cadence of the steps. Moments later, Sergeant Torres emerged from the shadows, her eyes wide as she took in the scene before her. "I'll be damned," she breathed. "You three certainly know how to make an exit." Relief washed over Stephen, but it was quickly replaced by wariness. "How did you find us?" Torres held up her hands in a placating gesture. "I'm here to help. There's a lot you need to know about what's really going on back at the colony." As Torres began to explain the conspiracy she had uncovered, Stephen and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Outside, the manhunt for their family intensified, unaware that deep in the bioluminescent forest, ancient technology was awakening. Technology that could change the course of human-denobulan relations forever. Aurora cooed softly from her perch on the pedestal, her tiny form glowing with potential. Whatever challenges lay ahead, it was clear that their daughter would be at the center of it all. As they absorbed the implications of their discovery, a distant rumble caught their attention. Stephen's eyes widened, recognizing the sound of approaching vehicles. "We need to move," he said urgently, reaching for Aurora. But before they could formulate a plan, the chamber's entrance slid open, revealing a tense standoff between human and denobulan forces. Admiral Chen stood at the forefront, his face a mask of dedication. Opposite him, a group of denobulan officials, led by Elder Vex, held their ground. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Elder Vex stepped forward, his weathered face etched with concern and wisdom. "Please," he said, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made even Admiral Chen pause. "Let us not act rashly. There is much here that we do not understand." Chen's eyes darted from the ancient technology to Aurora, who remained perched on the pedestal, her skin shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "What we have here could change everything," Sarah said, her scales pulsing with a mix of fear and hope. "This isn't about humans or denobulans. It's about our shared future." Stephen nodded, placing a protective hand on Aurora's shoulder. "Our daughter is living proof of what we can achieve together. And this place, it holds secrets that could benefit both our species." Elder Vex turned to Admiral Chen, his expression solemn. "I propose we allow this family to present their discoveries. Let us witness what they have found before we make any decisions." Chen hesitated, his military training warring with his curiosity. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Proceed." With all eyes on her, Aurora stepped forward. Her movements were graceful, belying her young age. As she approached the central console, her skin began to pulse with intricate patterns of light. The chamber responded to her presence, holographic displays springing to life around her. With a gesture, Aurora manipulated the images, projecting a vast star map that filled the room. Gasps of awe echoed from both humans and denobulans as they witnessed the scope of the lost civilization's reach. Aurora's fingers danced across the console, and the star map gave way to scenes of a thriving denobulan society. Cities of crystal and light, technology far beyond anything currently known, and glimpses of a culture that had mastered the integration of biology and machinery. As the display faded, Aurora turned to face the assembled group. Her eyes, vibrant and full of wisdom beyond her years, met Admiral Chen's. "This is our heritage," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not just denobulan, not just human, but a shared legacy of exploration and discovery." The tension in the room shifted, replaced by a palpable sense of wonder. Stephen saw an opportunity and stepped forward. "Admiral Chen, Elder Vex," he addressed both leaders. "What we've discovered here is too important to be claimed by any one group. I propose we form a joint human denobulan research team to study these ruins and their technology." Sarah joined him, her scales shimmering with conviction. "This could be the key to a new era of cooperation between our species. Think of the advancements we could make together." Admiral Chen's expression softened, the military man giving way to the scientist he had once been. "The potential benefits for Earth, for both our worlds, are undeniable." Elder Vex nodded, a smile creasing his aged face. "Indeed, this discovery could herald a new chapter in our shared history." As discussions began in earnest, Stephen pulled Sarah and Aurora close. "We did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah's scales pulsed with joy and relief. We found a way to protect our daughter and bring the truth to light. Aurora, her skin still glowing faintly, looked up at her parents with a mixture of innocence and ancient wisdom. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. Outside the chamber, word of the family's return and their incredible findings spread like wildfire through the colony. The image of Aurora, now resembling a young teenager due to her accelerated growth, working seamlessly with both human and denobulan scientists, captured the imagination of both species. As the initial shock wore off, the implications of their discovery began to sink in. Discussions of cooperation and shared research filled the air, drowning out the voices of division that had threatened to tear the colony apart. In the days that followed, Stephen and Sarah found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Scientific teams pored over the ancient technology, while diplomats from Earth and Denobula Prime engaged in heated negotiations about the future of the ruins and the surrounding area. Aurora's unique abilities made her an integral part of the research efforts. Her connection to the ancient technology allowed her to unlock secrets that had eluded both human and denobulan scientists for generations. As the family worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between their two species, they remained unaware of the forces still working against them. In the shadows, Voss and his extremist followers plotted one final, desperate attempt to derail the newfound spirit of cooperation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of human-denobulan relations, with Aurora standing at the crossroads of two worlds, her existence a testament to the potential of unity in the face of difference.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.